the question that I want to ask you is really whether you see it as a sign of kind of a healthy academic and institutional environment for universities to not only safeguard freedom of expression, the right of people to say what's on their mind, but also to create an environment that is democratic and safe and healthy, and to promote a range of different values that are part of a university. And the example I would give is, for example, imagine, let's just imagine a hypothetical church that preaches hate against groups in our society and incites hate against different ethnic minorities like migrants, like the rainbow community. And would you, when you imagine these provisions playing out in real life, would you imagine that it would be a kind of a legitimate decision within the framework that you're creating here for a university to say, that's not actually what we want in our university. We don't think that's conducive with a healthy democracy and the kind of community we're trying to build. And therefore, we won't provide a platform on our university for all of these people.
Look, I think there are a number of provisions here using that as an example. First of all, hate speech is already struck out in other legislation, so that would already fall outside of this bill. But secondly, I think what's really important with what we're doing here is that there'll be transparency of decision making as to how each institution actually came to decide, yes, this speaker or this event is okay and that is not. So their freedom of expression statement will require some sort of triage process, the steps that they will take, whereas at the moment that can be a little bit murky, how they reach this decision or that decision. But in the example you give, that would sit, I would have thought, in a hate speech criteria and therefore not be allowable, would have been my view.
Well, with respect, we don't have comprehensive legislative provision that deals with hate speech. And there's always a continuum with these things. I guess what I want to know is, and when you imagine this framework being implemented, do you see it as desirable that a university would make a decision like that, where you are to some extent compromising the freedom of people to say whatever they want or to hear what they want by saying this is not appropriate in our community to have this kind of expression going on, and we're not going to enable it in our university?
Yeah,
do you see that as?
Yes, I do. Under legislation, there are justifiable limits on various rights.
Yeah.
And that's an example of where through hate speech, and I accept that there's still definitions around hate speech. It sits a little bit outside this legislation, but justifiable limits on freedom of expression sits in legislation currently. But I think that transparency process is really important. Say, well, how did an institution make that decision, and to have that up front and to have that negotiated with the community as they form over that 6-month period they've got to form their statements, I think would be really important. Yeah.
Do you think, Minister, your officials could provide the committee with any other examples of deplatforming? Because the only one that I've heard referenced has been the celebrated Don Brash Massey University case. But if there are other examples, I for one would be very keen to hear from them. So if you could come back to us.
We have discussed some of these as well, so you certainly can.
Okay, come back to us with a list, that'd be great. Can I ask?
Sorry, I've got one. Is that a sub? If it's not, I'm saying, okay, probably. Sorry,
yeah. Minister, can you tell us what consultation you've done with the universities on this and what they said to you?
Yeah, so last year the consultation process was targeted to key stakeholders. The Vice-Chancellors as the key operational agents of this legislation were a part of that consultation. And from then to now, officials have had regular engagement with the Vice-Chancellors as to what these statements might look like, what the legislation might look like, what works for them, what doesn't. They'll also submit to the select committee process, I'm sure, as well. So there has been quite involved engagement with Vice-Chancellors particularly.
Did they, what were the vieys that they expressed in terms of
a range of views. To be frank, some said we don't need it, actually. Others said, oh, that would provide clarity. Thank you for clarifying that from an institutional neutrality perspective, our functions to maintain our role as the critic and conscience of society, but limited to our roles and functions. So some were pleased with that sort of clarity that this brings along. Others just said, why? What's its purpose? We think we're doing okay already. In fact, in some of their documentation had made steps this way already. I think Auckland may have had some early freedom of expression type statements, maybe AUT as well. So some were saying, oh, we sort of do this already, to which response would be, well, let's formalise it and standardise it. So that's sort of my take on what they've submitted.
Okay, thanks.